Well, I'm Elhum Shakerifar. I'm a documentary producer, and it's really, really happy to be here to do the Q&A with you.
Thank you.
Okay, no one can ever really hear me, so sorry about that. I thought maybe a good place to start would be with the title. Really, it's a really unusual title, but it comes, of course, from the Noam Chomsky phrase. Does it?
Yeah, it's a phrase by...
You need to switch the microphone on.
Is it better with this, or is it better if I don't? Yeah. Yeah, it's the Chomsky phrase, colourless green ideas sleep furiously. I don't really like the title anymore. I feel a bit embarrassed about it. So for me, in a way, it's the worst place to start.
Oh, sorry.
Or maybe it's the best place to start. I don't know. I struggled with the title a lot. When I was making the film, it was the library van. And I liked the library van, I liked the simplicity of it, but I was very worried that it would be seen as a film about a library van. I mean, I think that certainly financiers were expecting a sort of Welsh être à voir, and that's not what I was trying to do. And that title would have sort of confirmed that in some way. So during the post-production, I dropped the title. I knew that I wasn't going to continue with the title, The Library Van. And the title I really liked was a phrase from the film, which is, only monkeys eat nuts. And that's what I really wanted. Sorry?
It's not very easy to hear you.
To...
I can't hear you very well.
Only monkeys eat nuts. That was... and then I thought maybe people in the community would take offence and it would be misread, and while I was editing, I used the cutting room a bit like a painting studio, and I stick things up all over the wall, and this was the first time I worked with Mario Battistel, and he liked that very much, and used to take things that I put on the wall, pictures, and sometimes would take them and talk with me about them, or take them home and read stuff, and I used to kind of play around with it. And one of the things was I had the Chomsky line on the wall, and very early on I took it off the wall, and I just put the word "sleep furiously" underneath the monitor of my monitor on the editing table. And so that's how the title came about, and I never felt particularly comfortable with it. And I remember John Banville when he first saw the film, and he asked me why the title, and I could sense in the way he asked the question that he also hated it, and that made me hate it all the more. So
I actually really like it, and watching this ending again, and this kind of really eerie sense of, you know that things are going to change, that community. You can feel all the way through the film that there are certain elements that are going to change. The school is closing. You've got this auction at the end of the film, and you think, what's going to happen? And I thought it kind of echoed back to the title in an interesting way. I didn't know whether that was my reading or whether that was something. Whether now looking from a little bit of a distance, I suppose 2007 when it was made was just like the beginning of this technology micromanaging our lives kind of thing. And now we're full in it. I just wondered, with that distance, it makes you hate the title even more. To me, it makes it even more relevant somehow.
Well, I mean, I think these things are interesting because I suppose everybody engages and empathizes with things in terms of aspects of their own life and things that are important to them in their own life. And I suppose I made this film at a time when I mean, to put it very bluntly, I made this film at a time where I started to recognize the mortality of my mother. My father died when I was very young, and I think that certainly from friends of mine who've experienced both parents dying, that there's something very significant about becoming parentless, and I don't think I was aware of that at the time, but I'm watching the film now knowing that my mother's death is actually very imminent, and I think that there's a kind of, for me at the moment, there's the fear of the process of mourning prematurely, and I kind of wonder when I watch the film now whether there is a sort of premature mourning within the film. That's what I recognise in it now. Although at the time, for me, the kind of concept, in a way, of the film was much more involved with the circularity of life. That, you know, things die, but they become something else. The owl dies, and then it becomes a lamp or what.
Yeah. I think that's one of my favourite parts of the film. So I know that a lot of the audience are also film students and thinking about making their own films, and I suppose what's really beautiful is the layers of, you know that there's someone behind the camera that has a really strong relationship with this place, with most of these people, negotiating that sense of belonging and representing. There's a sense that there's a slightly outside perspective that's taken. At the same time, it's a very internal perspective. And I just wondered about negotiating that aspect of being inside something, but being aware of representing it to the outside world, and how you develop that in order to make the film.
I suppose the first thing to say to that is that I have absolutely no interest in this idea of representation. I mean, that word seems to come up a lot certainly within the teaching that I've experienced, that not just students but colleagues of mine use that word representation, and I question it most of the time, but certainly in relation to my own work, there is no intention of representation, and the world you see on screen for me is a fictional construct. It's my it's my inner world that I'm playing with, and not in any way trying to develop polemic or some kind of commentary.
Okay. I think there's also something about the film. It's really an exercise in looking and listening, and I wondered whether you could tell us about the colours that you've interspersed. I saw them almost like, when you go to, say, a wine tasting and you're given a couple of different fruits to taste, and suddenly the wine takes a completely different taste. Something almost like that. After these colours came up, I could see the images in a different way. That's completely my take, but I wondered what your...
What in what way? Can you say more about that? Why and
well,
I recognise that.
I was just reflecting on, these colours appearing on screen, and because it was more part of a journey, I wasn't thinking, why are they there? I realised that after seeing them, I could look at things much more clearly, and I think the film as a whole is it's so carefully observed. It's a lot of details, small details that, they make it very relatable, and, they give you a really heightened sense of, heightened awareness to what you hear, what you see, and I thought that the colours did that as well. They were very, they were very specific colours that you found in the palette of the colours used, almost painting-like. So I just wanted to ask about that in relation.
I mean, I think you connect things in a really interesting way there, because I think that the colours are also an observed detail. I mean, they literally are, because when filming, I didn't know why, but I wanted to keep back a certain number of rolls of stock specifically for just filming colour. Yeah. And so there were certain days where I went out with the camera and simply filmed colour. I just took the lens completely out of focus, and it's colour and light. And so there was a library of these different colours, and I didn't know how they were going to be used. I think there's this sense of not knowing, but there's I had a sense of the colours, and I had a sense of them being a part of the story, but I didn't know how that would actually work within the editing, and it was very funny. I remember editing, and one day Mario said, we ought to think about the colours, and I said, how do you know about the colours? Have you been looking on the Avid at some of the bins? And he said, he looked sort of very quizzically at me and said, but when we met, all we spoke about were the colours that you were filming. So when we first met to talk about whether he would edit the film or not. And so clearly during the filming process, the filming of the colours was in some ways the most important thing for me.
So does anyone have questions? There's a roving mic. Anyone put your hands up?
Hi. Oh, amazing film, first of all. I wanted to ask you, how did you go about filming your hometown? Like, how much time did you spend doing it? And did you just go around and see what was happening and film it? And how did the people react to it? Was everyone okay with being filmed? Because you were filming like very day-to-day life, in a way.
I think it's a very slow process, in a way. I mean, I think there was for me the added advantage that I knew the landscape, I knew the geography, I knew the layout, I knew certain people. The very first bit of filming I did was I made what I suppose what's now a film in its own right, but that's the antithesis of this, which is when I was trying to find finance for the film, I went to what was the Film Council, and they kind of came back and they said that they really liked what I'd written, but they can't give us the money that I was asking for on the basis of what was a page of A4. That's all I submitted, and they said, could you write some more? And I said that I suppose I could write some more, but there's really no point, because I don't know any more to write other than what's on that page of A4. And then I was feeling very truculent and kind of angry about the whole situation, and at one point in the middle of the meeting, instead of feeling sort of truculent about it, I suddenly thought, how can I turn this to my advantage? And so I turned to them and I said, look, instead of writing something, I could film something. So could you give me some money to film something? And they kind of paused for a minute and they said, yeah, okay. And so they gave me money and I said that I wasn't going to film a pilot of any kind. I just wanted to, in fact, I made it up at the spur of the moment, but it kind of made sense to me, and it still makes sense to me. I've always really liked those Richard Avedon portraits of the American West. And I wanted to replicate those, but shooting, which at the time was a kind of massive piece of equipment with high definition video, and so I think it was for 2 or 3 days we used the local school and turned the main schoolroom into a studio. And I worked with the DOP, and we used a lot of light to simulate the kind of very soft, diffused quality of the Avedon portraits, and created a large white background, and invited people from the community to come and speak to camera, or just have their portrait taken as a piece of moving image, or they could bring in an object and talk about an object, or sing a song, or whatever they wanted. And when we started with the first day, people came in dribs and drabs, but as word got round, there were queues and queues of people waiting to do this, and we'd laid on tea and sandwiches, and it became a kind of event. It was very nice. It was a really nice few days, and so that introduced people in a way to the project and to what might happen, although the film itself took place sometime after, I think maybe a year after we started the production. And to start with, I had an assistant and we had a production office, and then there was also a production assistant in London, and to start with, certain things were organised through other people. But then after a while, it developed its own kind of momentum, and also I had a lot of time where, you know, I just kind of drove around. It was like sort of man with a movie camera. I had a kind of big 4-wheel drive vehicle, and all the camera equipment was. I had to start with also a really, really great focus puller who taught me about looking after the camera and kind of rebagged everything and organised everything so that we had a fantastic sort of 16mm kit in the back of this vehicle, and some of the time I would work just with the sound recordist. Some of the time I'd work on my own. Sometimes we'd have sound recordist and a focus puller. Sometimes sound recordist, focus puller, and an assistant. It sort of depended on what was going on. But there were certain things that also I wanted and I looked for. You know, the auction. I looked for a farm sale that I could go and film. And some things needed a certain amount of organisation. There's a lot of stuff that never made the final film that also involved organisation. But it was a construct, you know. For instance, the filming in the school, the people you see teaching in the school aren't the school teachers. I think the music teacher had once been to the school to do a music lesson a long time ago. This is my own sort of construction of a world that's to do with my childhood and childhood memories.
Thank you.
First question.
Thank you for your film. Very, very affecting experience I had just now, so I'm very grateful to you for that. Picking up on your last comment, I'm interested whether that notion of sort of wanting to consider the experience you had as a child in any way influenced your choice of working with film, that the qualities that come from working with celluloid distance you in a way, as far as I'm concerned, from the immediacy that comes from working with video, and albeit in 2000. When did you start filming this?
2007, six.
Okay, so final production date is 2007. So HD existed, but it was of a different measure, as you've already described, the kit being huge. So I'm just wondering if you could say something about your motivation for working with film.
There certainly was a choice, and between film and it would have been sort of DV cam would have been the sort of the most obvious format at the time, and in fact I had that conversation with I mean, I suppose the most memorable conversation was with Mike Figgis, who was one of the executive producers on this, and Mike was very kind of pro the DV cam, I suspect because I'd asked whether I could borrow. He had an Arden, 16mm Arden I wanted to borrow, and I think he wasn't very keen to lend it to me. So I guess that was his kind of main take on it. But I like film. I mean, to talk. I could talk at length about my sort of suppositions about the differences. I mean, for instance, I've made quite a lot of films in the world of fashion, and the film that I made prior to this was a film for the BBC that was it was meant to be a film about Julian MacDonald, who had just got a job in Givenchy as the creative director, and I was sort of curious to see how this kid from Merthyr Tydfil suddenly what would happen when he was put in this very sort of rather violent world of couture fashion, and in fact the film became very much an exploration of the psychopathology of celebrity. I kind of developed a notion that celebrities are psychopaths, and the BBC hated the film. In fact, it got shelved. It was never shown. And I mean, partly because I cut out all the celebrities. They were expecting a kind of celeb fest, and there weren't any in there. But one of the things that was interesting about it was that I'd insisted that I was going to shoot it on 16mm, and again that was very controversial even at that point. In the world of fashion, if you backstage at a fashion show where they're endless TV crews, if you're there with a 16mm camera and a small crew, very efficient film crew, you're treated completely differently than being a TV crew. And I think even filming in the environment of Trefeurig, where people aren't media savvy and wouldn't really know the difference between film and video, I think there's something very endearing about the sort of clunkiness of film. The number of times I'd be filming something and a magazine would jam, or there'd be some kind of problem and you'd have to kind of take off a magazine and then clunk it back on, and the camera itself looks very different. And I suppose I work differently with the film camera, because for me the camera became a kind of intimate friend. I sort of looked after the camera more than I would look after myself. If I fell, which I did several times holding a camera, I would be much more concerned about saving the camera than saving myself. I don't think I would have the same thing with a video camera, which I kind of feel to be a bit more disposable. But the fundamental difference for me is what you pick up on, which in a way is that film images carry for me a quality that I equate much more with memory than a video image, which has a kind of immediacy. So a video image sort of carries all the signifiers, but that is kind of all it does for me. It doesn't have a kind of painterly quality, which takes me into a sort of different realm of contemplation. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Are there any other questions?
Being from the countryside, loved it, wicked. I'd just like to say, I'd just like to ask what reaction have you had from the villagers themselves? How much contact into their thoughts on the film?
I mean, I suppose I'm only really going to be privy to lots of nice things that have been said. I mean, I think that I think that it's inevitable that if you make a piece of work in a small community, and that piece of work gets a lot of public attention, it in a sense inevitably changes people's lives and people's perceptions on some level. I mean, even my mum would get stopped in the street after it came out in the cinemas, and in fact, no, she didn't. People didn't recognise her, but they recognised Daisy the dog, and so it's bound to affect people's lives in some way. I think that it still has an effect of sort of galvanising the community. I mean, the school's long gone, and a number of the people in the film have died, and I think for other people in the community and their family, the film and the archive of the film. So I gave all the additional footage to the film archive, and I think that that's become something that actually people treasure in a way. But I think somebody asked about sort of about my relationship with the community and the actual filming process, and there were a lot of people that really didn't want to be filmed, and some of them never were in the film. Some of them later on in the filming process became interested in being in the film. Some people made conditions. So, for instance, Gwyneth, who bakes the cake, said to me that she was very happy for me to film her baking the cake, but she didn't want anybody to see her face, so we didn't see her face. And so, I mean, people. I think that there's a lot of jargon that comes into more academic discussions about documentary making, and my take on it is to let go of the jargon and think about these things as being relationships, and like all relationships, they're sort of they're all kinds of different dynamics going on at the same time. It's you know, people are going to be resistant to something, but at the same time, most people have a narcissism that they kind of want to play to as well, and these things are kind of being traded off all the time. I think it's a mistake to see these things as being singular, and I think it's a mistake to use jargon as a way to avoid talking about human relationships, which is what happens when you make a piece of work with other people. You introduce a whole new set of relationships into the dynamic.
Great, thanks.
Is there a question at the front here?
Yeah, pleasure. How satisfied are you with the final cut of the film? Because from what you're saying now, it's like you're tackling quite a lot of yourself, really. It feels to me like a love letter to the countryside. I only watched it a few weeks ago, but immediately became resonant with me just because it seems to really capture what it's about being in the country and just framing something that's beautiful and just seeing it and enjoying it. But how satisfied are you with it? Is that, what kind of intentions did you really have, and did you meet them?
I don't think I knew exactly what my intentions were. I mean, I at the time I was very clear about my intentions because I needed to be, in order for it to stop being a vague idea and for it to start being a project and for it to be a financeable project. But when I make things, I don't really know what I'm doing. I mean, that's why I kind of, that's one of the sort of fundamental pleasures, is that I don't know what I'm doing. Again, I mean, you know, I introduce a sort of slight criticism here of and I kind of talk about these things because I know that there is a sort of an academic element to the screening, that there are people doing film courses who are here, and I think that that academia has been slightly overrun by this notion of research, which most of the time isn't research, because most of the time people are being called upon to say what the end result is before they've even started, and I'm interested in using camera and a microphone to discover things in the world, not simply to illustrate what I already know. So I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have an intention. I have a pseudo intention, and I guess that's necessary to negotiate certain sort of bureaucracies in a way. But just remind me of the question, because I kind of went off at a tangent there.
Just how much satisfaction you get from the final edit. That's kind of the answer I wanted anyway, so don't worry about it.
I mean, I was shocked when I was watching it that it's now almost 8 years since, I mean, maybe 7 years since I actually finished it. So and it is, you know, it's a kind of it's something that's been and gone for me, and I sat for the last 20 minutes because I haven't seen it for a long time, and I wanted to remind myself of aspects of it. I think that on some levels there are always kind of frustrations, but actually at the time when I made it, I was deeply satisfied with the production. In other words, there was nothing that I wanted that I didn't get. I mean, I think that Margaret was an extraordinary producer in terms that with very, very little finance, I got the shooting ratio I wanted. I was able to shoot on 16mm. I was able to edit with the editor I wanted in Paris. I was able to work with fantastic sound editor who I wanted to work with. I mean, every single step of the way, whatever I wanted, I got. And that was sometimes through negotiation, and there was compromise, but there's always going to be that. I mean, and what's more, the financiers kind of entirely left me alone. I mean, again, that was, you know, if the financiers are in Wales and you're editing in Paris, the chances are they're not going to come and see the rough cut. And if they do look at a rough cut on DVD, you know, they can make a few comments, but you can kind of say yes, 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 and carry on. And there's a point at which there's no money left, so nobody's going to pay for it to be recut. So I thoroughly enjoyed the editing process. I mean, it was a very painful process, and for most of it, I kind of felt that I was going nuts, and I kind of bawled my eyes out, you know, half the days I was editing, and it was really, really grueling, but on some level it was deeply satisfying. Mario and I found very quickly a sort of a way of working where we supported each other in all kinds of ways, and found different ways of looking at things, and it wasn't a battle. It really was working together in a fantastic way. And there was also another person who was, well, there were two people who were very important. One of them, in the credits, a writer called Peter Handke, who's an Austrian writer, I suppose best known as the writer of most of Wim Wenders' early films, up until Wings of Desire. And while I was shooting, I'd been reading a play written by Peter called Casper, and it really had a resonance for me in terms of what I felt I was trying to do but couldn't articulate. And it was Margaret who encouraged me to write him and see if I can go and see him and talk to him. I needed dialogues. I needed to talk with people about what I was doing, because I was really struggling in many ways. And Peter was very generous and said, yeah, come to Paris and have lunch and talk. And when we talked, he asked me to describe what I was doing, and I described what I was doing, and he said, what's the problem? It sounds wonderful. And I said, yeah, but I don't know what the story is. And he said, but you've told me lots of stories. And he started talking to me about what a story could be, and that a story doesn't have to have this kind of dramatic arc, that a story could be a gesture, a moment, and he gave me confidence about what I was seeing and what I was hearing, and I remember at the end of lunch he sort of embraced me and said, you have to trust your instincts. And I don't think anybody else could have said it in the way in which he said it to me at the time. And then throughout the rest of the making process, I went to see him maybe once every 4 or 5 weeks. I went to see him, and then he came to the cutting room once, and very often said very little. And there was another thing that was said that I think is very important, which was by a writer, psychoanalyst called Adam Phillips, and I'd shown him a rough cut. I think I showed 2 rough cuts, and the second one I talked with him about it and asked him what he felt about the second one, and he said something very simple to me, which was that he felt in the second one I was attempting to create too much aboutness, and he felt that it was much more interesting when there was less aboutness, and that introduced for me a kind of new concept, and something that again was really interesting and really important for me. So, for instance, one of the scenes I came in on was after you see the tree in the half melted snow, and you go to a scene which are just people's faces in a meeting, and that was another meeting about the closure of the school, and Mario and I had edited it, and it took ages. We worked on it for ages, editing it in terms of constructing a sort of narrative of what people were saying in the meeting. And there was one point where I was looking at this after I'd spoken with Adam on that occasion, and I went back to the cutting room, and I said to Mario, in that scene, can we take every shot that we've discarded, so take out all the dialogue, and simply work with the faces? And we did that, and both of us thought this is kind of right. And we also discovered in the editing process simple things like, I mean, Mario is an extremely experienced and skilled editor, and could create all sorts of kind of slight cheats in terms of sound and picture. And we discovered that in this particular film that the audio and visual cheats simply didn't work. They both of us could not allow those conceits to remain, and so we started unpicking a lot of the work that we'd done and just simplifying and purifying things.
By cheating, do you mean making it more self-explanatory? Do you mean like forcing a narrative to be there?
No, it might be kind of overlaying a certain piece of dialogue with another image, so that you can use a piece of dialogue even if you don't have picture for it, or you want to. So it's by cheat. I mean the syntax that's used in most film and television.
I think we've got time for one more question.
I try and concentrate on what's on the screen and not think about other films and other people. But seeing as you brought up the name Peter Hanke, I thought I'd share with you that I felt a name float into my head over and over during that film. And also I thought about a film that was an Italian film that was made about 3 or 4 years ago about a North Italian hill village.
Quattrovolte.
Yes. Yeah. The name, before you make your full comments on the name that floated in my head was John Berger, who I think the whole film was pervaded by his aesthetic and his loving portrayal of peasant life in South France where he lives, and the photographic books he's done. And I wondered if you have seen that Italian film, whether you felt flattered, because there were a lot of very similar scenes in your film, weren't
there? I mean, for me, there's that fantastically memorable shot in Quattrovolte of the, isn't it that somebody parks a small sort of truck, a motorcycle truck, and the brakes fail, or brick rolls out and it rolls down, and it's like that game I played as a kid called Mousetrap, where you kind of put ball bearing in and it sort of goes around a circuit and then causes the ultimate disaster and something falls over. I mean, I loved that shot in the film. It was funny. I think that so Quattrovolte was distributed by the same distributors as this, and they wanted me and the director of that film to meet, and it was sort of organised, and I sort of bottled out of it. I don't know why, but it's flattering, but there are always comparisons made between. The John Berger reference is very, very important to me. I constantly read and reread various essays by Berger, and I agree. I think he's a very, very important thinker.
Great. Well, on that note, thank you very much for a really interesting Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.